fiction for 60 to 90 minutes.
Maybe 60, but okay.
Hopefully not much longer than that.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the Hack Fraud Show. This is the penultimate installment in our Summer of International Film series. We're taking
not the final one.
Not the final one. We got one more coming next week, but for this one we decided to take a look at a couple of Mexican films. Although I think for the most part we'll be looking at one Mexican film because I think I'm the only one who watched both of them.
I got fucked by my schedule. What can I say?
I understand.
I don't like this anywhere as much as you do. But
you missed out on quite a ride with Tu Mamá También, I will say.
Yeah.
I'm not sure you would have liked it, but I was very much looking forward to talking about it with you.
Yeah, well, I wanted this. I mean, I wasn't sure if I was going to enjoy it either, but I still want to talk about it.
But we also watched. So that was one assignment, which only I watched, was Alfonso Cuarón's Tu Mamá También, and the other movie we watched was Guillermo del Toro's The Devil's Backbone. And I think these movies actually came out in the same year, so that actually kind of lined up oddly well.
That's interesting.
Anyway, we will get to all that and elucidate our thoughts on Guillermo del Toro and everything else in due course.
Yes.
But first, a very special What Have We Been Watching, because John is going to talk about a movie that I haven't seen yet. I'm going to see it tonight. I'm very excited? Question mark? I'm not sure,
okay.
But the movie is Darren Aronofsky's Mother, with an exclamation point.
Mother. That's all. The only way I can say that title. Mother is about a woman and her poet husband, and in the beginning of the movie, it's text that the house burned down, so Jennifer Lawrence is attempting to renovate it. Then an unsuspecting guest comes to the home that we learn is a fan of the poet, played by Javier Bardem. And, okay. This is a movie that begins with pretty basic home renovation and ends with human sacrifice. So, and let's just put it this way. There's, the first, half of this movie is pretty subdued, pretty basic. Then there's a certain point where it just goes cuckoo bananas, and nothing prepares you for when it goes cuckoo bananas.
Oh boy.
It's all about God and prophets and
yes, well,
humanity and
everything I've heard about this movie basically says that it's an allegory for a few different things. I kind of had the central allegory of it spoiled for me by a review. I was just telling John, I feel like someone who guessed the meaning of Lost within the verse, in that episode of BoJack where they flash back to 2007 and you see him talking to one of the actors from Lost, and he's like, so the island is purgatory, right? Spoiler alert for Lost, which I haven't seen.
Well, I guess, the movie is sort of, I think I remember I was, watching, a review of it, and they kind of said that, the movie operates, oddly enough, on a very dreamlike operating level. As far as visually, it's not very dreamlike. It's actually got a kind of very interesting style where, the great majority of it is either, really close-up of Jennifer Lawrence or, first-person perspective. From her, and that's a really interesting design choice. The house is really earnest. There's not until the very end, the imagery is pretty subdued. Then, but there are things like blood, being able. There's imagery of being able to peel back floorboards, it's paper, and the house is is almost a living organism in itself. There's a lot of very dream-like logic in it. The issue is that you have Jennifer Lawrence running around acting like it's a real movie and keeps telling people to get out of her house, and almost reacts like how real people would react, which at first makes sense, but once the moment it goes cuckoo bananas, you just go, "What the fuck am I watching?" I honestly don't know what to make of this movie because because the movie is just so extreme by the end. It's just hard to get anything out of it other than like some inert guttural response of ew. And I also had the worst viewing experience. This movie had the trifecta of loud audience members, a family bringing in their children, and a screaming baby.
Oh, there was a screaming baby at Darren Aronofsky's mother? Good
and
lord.
An entire fucking family from 5 to 7.
Oh, no. I mean, I haven't seen this movie yet, but based on everything I've heard, I'm already appalled.
This is not appropriate for children. Let's just put it that way. Mother is not appropriate for the whole family.
Good lord, I thought it was crazy when someone brought their children to John Wick Chapter 2.
Oh my god, this is... I'm just watching this movie, and I just kept and I just keep trying to imagine the perspective of the kid kicking the back of my seat. Like, what the fuck is he seeing?
Wow, that kid's gonna be scarred for life now.
Well, I imagine like the first half of the movie he's just kind of bored, but then when the crazy banana stuff happens, he will never forget.
Oh boy.
But yeah, I don't know. I think it's just far as like looking at it as a movie, the movie spends a bit too much time in like ramping up and trying like to ramp things up. Because I think once the cuckoo banana stuff happens, there is no way to ramp up to that because it is so fucking berserk.
Yeah.
I think what happens, it's the first half of the movie that's kind of dull, and then moves into something where you keep asking, what the fuck am I watching?
Well,
so
sounds fun.
Think of that as, I can't say I don't recommend it because I just desperately want to talk about it.
Yeah, we'll get into this in more detail next week once I've actually seen it. Oops.
Yeah, but Jennifer Lawrence is good. Everyone loves that Javier Bardem.
That's good. Good to hear.
So,
I feel like Jennifer Lawrence has fallen out of favor a bit lately, so it's good to see her.
Yeah, there's some odd sort of knee-jerk reactionism against her, and I'm not entirely sure why.
I don't know why either. I mean, she seems like a perfectly fine, delightful person, and I don't know. Although,
is it because like people think she's a dick in interviews? Because like, welcome to actors, rest of the world.
She is a blunt and pretty normal person in interviews, all things considered. Which I think is great. Yeah, I support that. Also, audiences seem to have really not dug this movie. I don't know if you saw it. It got a very rare F on CinemaScore, which is the audience polling service that tries to determine how audiences are reacting to movies.
I cannot say I am surprised.
The trailers for this movie...
That surprises me one bit.
I don't know how anyone saw... I guess people saw the trailers and expected a more like conventional horror movie.
Yeah, well, I mean, it scared me. We'll just put it that way. It can scare you if that's what you fucking want.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen too much of Darren Aronofsky's filmography either. I think I've only seen The Wrestler, which is, from what I've heard, like his most straightforward movie.
Yeah. Well, he also made like the batshit crazy Noah movie a few years ago.
Oh,
so,
yeah. I forgot that movie happened.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I expected like batshit crazy biblical stuff, but like Dan said, even expecting the most batshit crazy thing doesn't prepare you.
Yeah, my roommate came back from this movie last night. He walks in, he's like, "Dude, like I ran up the stairs. Like I had to tell you about this. Like, no matter how crazy you think this movie is, you're not prepared."
I just kind of want to pour out and just tell you like everything that happens, but.
Well, thank you.
Because like all of it will just make you go, what?
Thank you for not doing that.
Yeah, but
as much as I don't usually care about spoilers, I think this is like the one time I really want to be surprised.
I kind of just want this stuff to hit you. Reed,
I kind of want to see this now.
Don't you? Oh God, I don't know.
I want to see this now. I kind of want to see this.
I don't. I mean, if you. I guess it's the kind... If you want to be shocked, if you want to feel like inert Lovecraftian horror, sure. Sure. I don't know who to recommend this to with like any form of earnestness, But regardless, Mother.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it later.
We'll talk more about it later. What else have you seen lately, John?
What else have I seen? One of the things I looked at. This is for a class of mine. I have to do a presentation on it. It's the pilot for a '60s kind of well-known television series called The Fugitive.
Oh, yes.
The Fugitive. I kind of like it. It's I call it a pulp sandwich because like it is like it's the sort of thing. It's kind of a sort of Hitchcockian thriller where this guy has been charged of a crime he didn't commit. Mm-hmm. But he's now on the run looking for the man who really did it, and it's all that sort of Nietzsche on the run kind of stuff. And there's a police officer shamelessly based on Javert from Les Miserables, and who's out there to get him at any cost. And I am here to obey the law, not to enact justice, and all that sort. And there's all sorts of like I think the most fascinating image in it is that like they go to this bar, which in theory is right out of a noir. Like they have a woman playing the piano. But it's all like this Western theme, so like there's cowboy wallpaper and like all sorts of Western accoutrements, and I think that's kind of the show in a nutshell, just like classic noir juxtaposed with sort of old westerns, and that's apparently what the creator based a lot of it out of. So like if you're looking for just kind of a lot of like pulp influences circling around in one place, I think it's a pretty good time, and it's pretty cinematic for '60s television.
Yeah. I haven't heard too much about the show. I have heard repeatedly that the 1990s film adaptation is actually really good.
Oh, is it? I really before diving into this, I really hadn't done any research into the 1990 film.
Yeah, we may have to look at that at some point.
Yeah, I'd be up for that. Yeah, the original show, it's pretty entertaining.
Oh, good.
I liked it. Other than that, I'll wait for Reed.
Okay, Reed. What have you seen lately?
I actually watched something again.
Okay.
Oh.
I finished off Ron Frick's Baraka, and towards the end of this movie, so like the last third, yeah. I have a list. Anyways, this is where it gets a really fun part of the movie. You know. You get a shot on what's called the Boneyard, which is remnants of an Air Force base in New Mexico, where they send all the defunct aircraft there, especially those made in excess. You have an interesting juxtaposition where you get a scene of Polish people shoveling ash or coal into a furnace, and the very next scene is the ovens from Auschwitz. And then it goes on from there. More shots of Auschwitz, which is, a human tragedy far back in memory. And that follows it up with a Cambodian concentration camp from the days of Pol Pot.
Ooh, the genocide sequel.
Oh, yes. And they basically did that with just a pile of human skulls and a pile of femur bones, rather. And yeah, that's a good way to end it. Well, actually, that's not how it ends. It ends in a weird, strange time lapse of these monuments that are shaded from light, except from the sky above, and it goes through a time lapse as you have the sun crossing the sky with stars revolving. This just keeps going, and then all over natural landmarks. So I guess that was a good way to end it, but I don't know.
Do you like it?
I probably wouldn't see it again, but I thought it was interesting.
Okay.
On a list of films you had to see for a class, pick this one.
Okay.
And that's all Tyler, what did you watch?
What did I watch? Well, the short answer is not much. It seems this semester I'm not going to have a lot of time for extracurricular movies because I'm not taking any film viewing classes or film studies classes, I should say. And I've been very busy thus far, and it's only the third week. But I did watch a couple of things that I can talk about. I finished up the season 4 of BoJack Horseman.
Ooh.
And I can officially say, while this season was not perfect, I mean, so few things are. Although I would say that season 3 is one of those things.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting. Like I said, it takes the show to a new place. It feels like they're charting a new course. I don't know if I mentioned this last week. You can tell that their budget went up, I think. Like, the movements are a little bit smoother. The design gets a little bit crazier than even it was before. There's a lot of just subtle things that you kind of pick up on that you can tell, like, the budget got inflated a little bit. Yeah, there's just a lot going on. I would say it's not quite as rich as some previous seasons, but again, it's a really interesting watch. I still love this show so much. I'm excited for where it goes in the future, and it was interesting and heartbreaking and hilarious. Everything you've come to expect from BoJack Horseman.
Few series are as ambitious as BoJack Horseman.
That is very true.
Which is, I don't think any of us were expecting when they announced the show.
I didn't really hear too much about the show when it was initially announced, but its cultural cachet has grown considerably in the years since, and
there's a whole bunch of shitty video essays about it on YouTube.
Or you could just listen to us ramble about it instead. Why don't you do that? Anyway, and then I guess the other big thing I have to talk about is my roommate has decided that he needs to catch up on Game of Thrones. So
wanted to do that.
Just kind of it's a big thing. It's the big cultural thing on TV right now. As you may know or as you may not know, I watched the first 4 seasons of the show in their entirety. Watched 2 episodes of season 5, stopped, and never went back.
But you still read the...
I still read the Wikipedia summaries of every episode the day after it airs, because I like to be up to date on what's going on. But anyway, just through like periphery and kind of wandering in and out of the room, I have re-experienced a little bit of the first and early second season of Game of Thrones. And I have to say, I developed many artistic frustrations with the show, like the further into it I got, but god damn it, like I had forgotten how eminently like watchable and entertaining the show was when it started. Okay. I don't think it's any real coincidence that the show, kind of seems to have not gone off the rails, but become a very different kind of show, like when it stopped following the books. I don't think it's any coincidence that, like, the last great... I think everyone pretty much agrees the last great season of the show was season 4, which I agree. Season 4 of Game of Thrones is really, really quite spectacular, even though it is shattering in a lot of ways. I don't know. The first couple seasons of the show are just super, like, engaging, and the world building of it is done with remarkable efficiency and skill, and it is very pulpy and very engaging. And actually, just last night, we watched the episode where, spoiler alert, Sean Bean as Ned Stark gets beheaded. Which is a spoiler that I thought everyone knew about, but actually my roommate didn't. So he didn't actually know what was coming somehow. And let me tell you, I remember, like, when that happened. Like, I wasn't watching the show at the time, but I was still a subscriber to Entertainment Weekly, like, in its print form at the time, and that was a big deal. That was a really big deal when that happened. Like, Entertainment Weekly had, like, a 2-page, like, article spread about it. It was huge. Because Sean Bean was the lead of that show. He was a high-priced, like, film actor. He was the star. He was the lead. And... a lot of people really didn't think that they were to actually follow through with the book's execution of that character, and they do, and that scene is fucking amazing. It's a fantastic scene. It's an incredibly written, incredibly directed sequence of television. The best thing and simultaneously the worst thing about it, like just in terms of like as a viewer, is that he is completely brought low at that moment. The whole arc, the whole thread of the season that like leads to this is that he discovers that Joffrey, now King Joffrey, is the product of incest. He threatens to reveal it. He's arrested and accused of treason. And to spare his life and save his daughters, he decides to confess. So he confesses to a crime he did not commit, swears loyalty to product of incest King Joffrey, expecting to be spared as he was promised by pledging loyalty. And then Joffrey has him executed anyway. And it is such a masterstroke of dramatic writing to have him completely and totally humiliated and then kill him. Like, things could not have possibly been worse for this guy. It's insane. And I really do applaud the writers for that. So I had forgotten some of the many merits that this show had going for it. So those are my renewed thoughts on Game of Thrones.
Okay. I guess I'm still not rushing to it at this point. At least I don't know. I guess even like when I've seen it in its like early form, I've still been nothing but bored by it.
It does take some time for the first season to pick up. I will say that. Although season 2 and season 3 and season 4 really do kind of run from beginning to end, and they're very interesting.
Maybe I could look at those
if I remember correctly.
Magically find time.
I might be wrong, but anyway, that's Game of Thrones, and that's pretty much all I have to talk about this week.
Okay. I think I guess I have like one last thing to discuss, and then we can get away, because I think it's a fascinating movie, even though I think it's only like 25 minutes. Louis Buñuel's Land Without Bread.
Oh, I don't know anything about this. Please enlighten me.
It's sort of framed as a documentary about a very poor part of Spain right before the the Spanish Civil War. And what it actually is a sort of farce framed as documentary where Buñuel makes fun of the people who live there. just to like make fun of the authority of narration. Whereas we have things of like people ripping heads off of chickens, and then the narrator saying, "It is very possible to judge the psychoanalytical nature of this event. We will not do so." And then they just move on. And there's another time where we see a goat ragdoll down a hill, which was done because they shot the goat, brought it back up to the hill, and threw it down. There is another scene where you're told that, like, they transport hives through by goat. And then we see a scene of the hive falling off and a goat being stung to death. What actually happened was Louis Buñuel tied down an old goat, smothered it with honey, and released bees. All for what reason? I don't know. Other than like this movie just seems to be almost a joke in itself.
Good Lord.
And it's kind of incredible and kind of weirdly funny.
Oh boy, Buñuel is someone that I know I should check out, but I'm really afraid to.
Chien Andalou.
What'd you say?
Un Chien Andalou. I assume you've seen that, the movie where he cuts open a woman's eye.
Oh yeah, I've seen that clip.
That clip, but yeah, that's also. I mean, well, that's a great thing is that we saw some of the reviews about it from the time, and one of them said like, "Oh, it is finally good to see Buñuel move on from donkeys inside grand pianos," which is something from Un Chien Andalou. But he's talking about a film where they throw a goat off a mountain twice.
Oh boy.
Which I think I just can't imagine like another filmmaker like this during this period.
Oh man.
And it's kind of incredible.
Wow.
But so that's Land Without Bread. I guess it's the sort of thing like Buñuel will show you images that may or may not shock you. Sometimes for a joke, it seems, and I guess I kind of like that. As horrible as a person as Buñuel might be.
Well, there it is.
But regardless, I just feel like that's a movie worth talking about.
Yeah, Buñuel is someone we're gonna have to look into possibly in the future. I'm scared, but
yeah,
we'll have to.
I don't know. Land Without Bread is kind of entertaining.
Okay.
Like in a really dark comedic way.
Yeah. Well, none of his movies are super long, so I don't know. It could be.
He's like he's sort of a flighty surrealist.
The Exterminating Angel is one you always kind of hear about. So. Anyway.
But I think that's just about everything of note I've seen this week.
Alrighty then.
Other than like a shitload of Simpsons.
Oh, really?
Ooh, fucking great.
Yeah.
That's fucking great. That is, I think it's a shame that like what we think of the show now is like, oh, it's the thing that's gone on too long and is now past its prime. Because you're right, like early '90s Simpson is fucking brilliant.
It's incredible. Like the run this show had from like season 3 to season like 9 is unparalleled in TV history.
This is some of the sharpest satire on TV that has ever been on TV.
Yeah. Which episodes have you been kind of?
Oh, it's kind of intermittently because I think the Stonecutters episode is absolutely fucking hilarious. The monorail episode is gold. Anything with Mr. Burns is fucking hilarious.
I love Mr. Burns.
There's a social security card. That's an SS card, you duncoff.
Yeah, actually I forgot. I watched the Streetcar Named Desire episode with my friend this week, and he is also kind of uninitiated in The Simpsons, and he.
If you are, I mean, it is easy to sort of throw it off, but like get this show in its prime, you will be thoroughly entertained.
Yes, I completely agree.
But regardless, that is what I've been watching.
Huzzah! All right, well, enough of that. You came here to hear us talk about Mexican filmmakers, so talk about Mexican filmmakers we shall. Should I just quickly like rattle off Y Tu Mamá También before we spend the next 20 minutes talking about Devil's Backbone?
I guess try and like either sell it or unsell it for me.
Well, I really want you to watch it because I want to hear what you think, even though I'm really not sure you're going to like it.
Well, this podcast and film studies in general is about seeing movies you may or may not like and judging them from there.
That's true. So this is Alfonso Cuarón, director of such luminary films as Children of Men and Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Which really, I want to know who saw this movie and went, that guy should direct a Harry Potter movie.
Yeah!
Because the first scene of this movie, you see the opening logos, like title fades up, Y Tu Mamá También, fade out. First image of this movie, two Mexican teenagers, completely naked, having sex on a bed. Just going at it. Just raw dogging it, as they say.
I love Reed's face right now.
There are movies I have seen with more sex scenes, like say The Wolf of Wall Street, just as an example.
Yeah.
But sex permeates like the blood of this movie in a way that is maybe unlike any other movie I've ever seen.
Interesting. So, Wolf beats it by volume, but Y Tu Mamá También beats it by density.
Well, it's sort of.
Concentration, maybe. Yeah.
Okay.
Basically, the main thread of this movie is you have these two teenagers played by Diego Luna and Gael Garcia Bernal. Their girlfriends go off on a kind of a backpacking trip to Europe. So they're all alone for the summer. They meet this kind of alluring, slightly older woman at a wedding and kind of brag to her about their big plans for a road trip. then when her husband cheats on her, she suddenly decides to join them on this fake road trip, so they have to hastily scramble to actually be able to go and go somewhere. And so they pick her up and they're off on the road, and then like most of the middle of this movie is them on the road talking about love and life and sex and drugs and smoking weed and getting into very peculiar and charged sexual situations.
Interesting.
And having their friendship tested. It is really a coming-of-age story, and it focuses on the relationship between these two boys, really. Like, you see this movie and you're like, oh, these guys, like, are pretending they're all that. They are children, still. And it's interesting. I don't know, the way it's made is kind of weird. It was shot by the great cinematographer Emmanuel Lubezki, who I would never want to diss Emmanuel Lubezki. But the way this movie's shot is interesting. As expected with Cuarón and Lubezki, it uses a lot of long takes, a lot of kind of wide to medium wide shots, and I don't know. It's interesting. There's this cool little device where there's like an omniscient narrator who keeps like cutting in, like the sound will cut off and then the narrator will start speaking, and like explain something that kind of doesn't really fit into like the narrative of the movie, but kind of fleshes out the characters and the world a little bit more. So that's all interesting stuff. Again, I don't really know what the point of like all the sex in this movie is. I really don't think he was doing it just for shock value. And really in this day and age, nothing is that shocking anymore. But except for Darren Aronofsky's mother, apparently. But I don't know. It was just a little bit strange. I mean, and there are long stretches of this movie without any sex scenes, but it's still like just is always like hovering under the surface. Like there's a scene where like they're at this like, and both of the boys are like kind of members of like the upper class Mexican society. So they're like able to like have access to this country club like on the day when like no one's there. And there's a scene of them just like jerking off on diving boards together. It's very strange.
I guess I have this to ask. Is it funny?
Sometimes, yes.
Okay, because like this kind of sounds like if like a bunch of art house filmmakers got a hold of like a Seth Rogen script.
It's not quite like I wouldn't describe it that way because it's got some like themes of maturation on its mind, and like it's kind of weirdly like set against like the political backdrop and economic backdrop of Mexico. Like it's set at the time like when, because like apparently, I don't know if you know this, like one party was in control of the Mexican government for like 70 years, and then when Vicente Fox was elected, that was like that which happened in like 1999, I think. That like broke that streak, and like that happens like while the events of the movie are going on, which is really interesting. Yeah. So
it sounds like I'd like elements of this movie, certainly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there are a lot of elements of it that I did enjoy and appreciate, and it's consistently entertaining. Like it's not a boring movie. So
it kind of sounds crazy. So
I don't know. I think it's worth checking out. I was just a little bit perplexed as to kind of what Cuarón was trying to say with this movie.
Okay. Okay. So would you recommend it?
I'd recommend it. It's definitely not for everyone, but I think if you can handle the explicit content, I think
if you're not a prude,
I think it can be an interesting experience.
Okay then. Are we ready to talk about Guillermo del Toro's?
Okay. His name is pronounced Guillermo del Toro.
Oh, okay.
Guillermo, yeah.
Just wanted to make sure we got that.
Oh, okay.
All right. Yes, Guillermo del Toro's The Devil's Backbone. 2001, same year, I think, as I mentioned before.
Interesting enough.
So Guillermo del Toro is one of those. He's a very interesting filmmaker.
Yes.
He is a guy.
Both of us absolutely adore Pan's Labyrinth.
Pan's Labyrinth is incredible.
Yes.
And weirdly ties into The Devil's Backbone a lot, as we'll talk about in a minute. But he's a filmmaker who like always seems to have like 10 things in development at once, and the things he like chooses to make are really interesting and maybe occasionally disappointing. I mean, I didn't see Crimson Peak, but that seemed to be not what most people wanted from him. I also haven't seen Pacific Rim, which
I haven't seen that. I just find it odd that like things like he has things like Pan's Labyrinth and even like Crimson Peak and stuff, but there's also the Hellboy movie and Pacific Rim.
I have seen Hellboy 2, and Hellboy 2 is pretty good.
I've only seen Hellboy 1. And that one, I like it.
Okay. Well, I've heard Hellboy 2 is the one that people always kind of ride for. I've heard Hellboy 1 is not so hot. Yeah. That's kind of the general consensus. Anyway, he's a guy who's like worked within the studio system, but he's also made several kind of like lower fi, fantastical, like personal films, and this is one of those movies. Made in Mexico, done in Spanish, a lot of kind of gothic horror elements, and
but there's always kind of like you can tell he's kind of a Hollywood studio filmmaker, even when he makes like these Spanish language personal films. Yeah. That sort of like crowd pleasing sort of sensibility does bleed into it.
Yeah. Well, I think we talk about, I don't know if this is true for all of Mexican cinema, but what Mexican cinema I have seen seems to have that same thing that like Hong Kong and South Korean cinema seems to have, where they know how to make it artful, but they know how to make it like really entertaining at the same time.
But then there's two people jerking off on diving
boards. Well, I can't speak to that. But so this movie, I really liked it.
I like it too. I like it too. I guess I'm just sort of wondering what the point of it is, other than like basic themes of revenge and like set on a backdrop of the Spanish Civil War.
Well, it's interesting. Okay, so this movie, let me just say this up front. It kind of feels like a dry run for Pan's Labyrinth in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Both movies are set against kind of the backdrop of the Spanish Civil War. Both movies have like weird kind of like gothic horror elements and center on children, but are also like
set in like a single location.
Yeah. They use kind of like the framework of like children's stories and fairy tales, but then like take it and make them like weirdly just like more twisted and kind of fucked up, but also just like in a way that like feels more real. Like these movies feel like
they're fantasy films that sort of start off like the gist of it will be revealing the fantasy, but then they just start becoming about the political backdrop they're set against.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, it feels like both these movies, like, for all their fantastical elements, like, really take place in the real world somehow.
Yeah, they're always about Spain.
Yeah.
is what happens.
Yeah, and that's all really interesting. I don't know, I like this movie quite a bit, so let me kind of frame this. So, we start with a boy named Carlos being dropped off at like this kind of weird orphanage in remote Spain toward the end of the Spanish Civil War, after his father has been killed in battle. He is dropped off, is kind of immediately, this kind of feels like your classic like kid's story of like orphan is dropped off at like mysterious like boarding school or orphanage type of place
with the people around him.
Yeah, like doesn't quite fit in, is bullied, makes kind of a couple friends. There's some kind of weird like mysterious stuff going on. And
he must discover, and
like I say, I found this movie, I thought it was really fun. There's kind of the central thing of it is that like there was this boy who kind of mysteriously died not too long ago, and his ghost kind of keeps coming to like haunt Carlos in a weird way. And meanwhile, there's also like this soldier who is like trying to find the gold that is supposedly hidden in this place.
Yeah, because like it's I think it's like a boarding school that's like kind of bankrolled by the Republican forces.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, some like they're like children, or like some of the children of the fighters there are kept there.
Yeah. I don't know. It's got all like the kind of the trappings of like Guillermo del Toro's best work. Just a lot of really cool design, really interesting like horror and gothic and fantasy kind of elements.
really dynamic camera work.
Yes, which seems to be just characteristic of these Mexican directors. I don't know what it is, but like between Del Toro, Cuarón, and Inarritu, like they all seem very interested in this dynamic camera work
like
and
consistently
long
moving
takes.
camera.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
which is great. I think it lends their work a lot of very
the film's
striking
gorgeous.
visuals. Yeah, it's gorgeous. So I do kind of agree with you. Like once it's over, I was kind of like, okay, so what was the point of all that?
Yeah, like I guess that's kind of like other than like vague things of like, of course, like revenge and how like we find out that like the soldier killed the boy we see the ghost of throughout the movie, and then like it becomes about like now we have to kill this man to get revenge for this boy. And all set against the deeply uncomfortable backdrop of the Spanish Civil War. And, like, this is a boarding school that has a giant unexploded bomb in the center of it with, like, ribbons flying, which I just find so fascinating.
Yeah. That's a great little element of production design.
Oh, yeah, great location.
He just has... Del Toro just really has that gift for, like, iconography, where he can just sear an image in your brain, just kind of almost seemingly effortlessly.
Like, I think I can remember just about all of the designs in Pan's Labyrinth.
Yeah. Reed, what did you think?
So I like this movie.
Yeah.
I think I can say that. I really loved the beginning and just how the movie was set up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the kind of like boy on his own in boarding school tale with fantastical elements.
Yes, and also you have a lot of side characters coming into the foreground and coming back out and whatnot, and also a great scene, just great location, and also the bomb. So how they rationalized the title, I thought was disturbing. They stillborn babies and drop them in clear rum, and then they drink the rum for their ailments, and then apparently that's how the doctor finances the school, by selling that rum from the Devil's Backbone.
I am just going to assume that's like some local thing. I'm just going to assume that, and if Del Toro made that up, well then.
Yeah.
So I kind of don't know what the point of that was in the mix of it, other than maybe an allusion to dead children, maybe.
Yeah, I guess maybe like an allusion to Santi and so forth. How he was dropped in water to drown.
Yeah.
I guess I'm not really sure.
Neither am I.
That seems too strange for him to have come up with it by himself. I feel like that's kind of like tied into like old timey, superstition and whatnot.
Yeah, that's what I assume so. There's also like the doctor says I'm a man of science, and then he just brings this out.
Yeah, very strange. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, but in spite of all that, I feel like this is a really entertaining movie. It's got a lot of really cool stuff going for it.
It is like a very it's a movie full of life. Like all the children are really compelling and interesting, and the scenes of them bonding are all really interesting and compelling.
That is another thing.
I love the scene where like the boy who draws comics gives them a picture of a naked woman, and the vagina's the wrong way.
It looks like a mouth. Yeah, that's all good stuff. That is another thing about.
Kids feel like real kids. They curse. They have dirty jokes.
Yeah. See, that's another thing about Del Toro's best work is that you feel like he could tell you like everything about all his characters.
Yes.
And they all seem to have just such rich like internal lives. And that's definitely true in this movie. Like I love that like principal who like in most other movies would just be like another like kind of stern authority figure. Like she only has one leg. She like has some like kind of weird, like weirdly twisted love triangle with like the soldier, what's his name, like Jacinto, and like the doctor, like, she's just so much of a richer character than you would ordinarily expect in a story like this.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
like, the bully character is, like, so much richer than you would usually expect in a story like this.
Oh, certainly.
How, like, he saw Santi die, and, like,
and is terrified by, like, the man who did it.
Yeah.
Like, the strange
all really
power
good stuff.
dynamic of the school.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, the woman character is pretty rich in detail as well, because, you know, she keeps all the ingots in her false leg.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, all the ingots in the false leg.
Yeah. There's a great little detail. I love that.
Oh, yeah. Del Toro's great at details.
Yeah, I think this movie's definitely worth checking out. It's very
sure.
entertaining. It's got a lot of really cool stuff in it.
I guess, like, if you saw Pan's Labyrinth and wanted a little bit more,
yeah,
this will give you that.
I was gonna say, yeah, if you like this, it does feel a lot like kind of a warm up for Pan's Labyrinth, but
yeah,
you know, I feel like they go really well together as kind of a complementary pair, and just, I don't know, any excuse to see, you know, Del Toro just exploring this thematic territory and exploring, you know, gothic horror and everything. I fully support that, and I think it's a really fun experience.
As do I. And granted, few things are as rich and fleshed out as Pan's Labyrinth.
Yeah. If you get nothing else from this, go watch Pan's Labyrinth, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, that's implied with Del Toro. Like, if you haven't seen that, you haven't seen Del Toro properly.
I haven't seen it.
Go watch it.
Yeah.
It's very entertaining and very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So
there we are.
Do we have anything else to say?
I guess, like, yeah, I guess that's where we are. It's a very fleshed out, interesting warm-up for a masterpiece.
Yeah.
And that's worth seeing.
I agree.
There you are. What's your final thoughts, Reed?
Good. Okay, there you go.
Good.
I forgot to bring up the big news of this week. As we record this, we lost the legendary Harry Dean Stanton just a couple days ago.
That's just a tragic loss.
So soon. I mean, he was 91. He lived quite a life.
At any age, losing Harry Dean Stanton was going to be a tragedy.
That is true. But so soon, like on the heels of Lucky being finished and about to hit theaters.
Yeah.
I hope he wins an Oscar for this movie.
I do too. I think everyone does.
Yeah. I'm really looking forward to seeing it.
As am I.
This is as good a time as any to remind everyone that you should go see Paris, Texas.
Yes, you should. It's very good.
It's quite excellent. Dr. Reed is looking shifty because he didn't watch Paris, Texas.
Well, you should.
But that's okay. You should watch it. Now you have an excuse to do it. So that's that.
I guess if you want to wrap, I forgot to describe. This is a strange thing to talk about now, but like, I finally saw the trailer for it. Breathe.
Oh no!
What the fuck is Andy Serkis doing?
Making a big play for something, which
I don't know why. I don't know why he's making this. I don't know why Andrew Garfield's involved. I guess they just really want Oscars.
I guess.
But yeah, it's if you want to see a parody of an Oscar bait movie, so go watch that trailer.
Well, my friend and I had an idea for like we'd do a movie that would be like a spoof of Oscar bait movies, but market it completely straight so that everyone would be fooled into thinking it's a completely straight terrible Oscar bait movie. And then when it comes out, the reviews will come out and be like, it's actually an amazing parody of Oscar bait movies.
Almost like Buñuel's Land Without Bread.
These are the things we think about. But anyway, so next week we will officially be wrapping up our Summer of International Films series. And to do that, I think we're going to return to Hong Kong to have a look at the work of Mr. Johnny To.
I think that's been this year's great discovery for us is the Hong Kong action film.
Yeah, I'm very excited to check out more of them. So,
what of Mr. Toe's work will we be looking at?
All right, so Darren Franich recommended a movie of his called Drug War, which I'm very interested in checking out.
Straight from the man's hand, it's himself.
Yes, and then another one that was also recommended to me was a slightly earlier one called Running Out of Time. Which,
interesting. How long are these?
They're fairly short. Running Out of Time is 93 minutes. Drug War is... Give me a second. Drug War is 105 minutes.
Okay, well, that's one thing I've learned from Hong Kong so far is that they do not waste a single second of your time.
They do not.
I am excited.
Hooray. All right, so more Hong Kong crime action thrillers coming your way from the hand of Mr. Johnny Toe, from the mouth of recommendation of the Vidiots Video Store show.
This will be the magnum opus of recommendations.
This is our grand finale for the Hack Fraud Show's Summer of International Film before we dive into horror cinema going forward here.
I hope I'm not violently disappointed.
I hope so too. All right. So, thank you all once again for joining us. Sorry we only...
Come back next week for Hong Kong and navel gazing.
Yes. Sorry we only dove deep on one movie this week, but next week we will have Hong Kong and reviews, more in-depth thoughts on Mother. So, should be a good show, hopefully.
Oh, goodness.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Goodbye.
See you next time.
Goodbye. Kitty Cat, are you going to stay in the frame for the lovely people? I guess you aren't.
That's okay.
Bitch.
We know him well enough.